woke with the heavy silence of a morning that barely stirred the dusty air of Punt. The cold stone beneath your bare hands, pressed firmly against your skin, coarse fabric brushing your arms, offering scant defense from the relentless sun already hinting at its midday roar. The faint, almost forgotten scent of dried resin lingered in the cracks of your humble shelter, whispering the reason for your departure. The secret incense hunt, a silent burden weighing like the few shadows beneath the scorching sky. Your fingers traced the dry air, feeling the persistent scrape of your woven basket as you prepared it. Each step on the hardened earth echoed softly, a slow rhythm dictating your journey, to scour eternal hills, to search twisted trees, while the weary hum of insects accompanied your tired movements. The monotony wrapped itself around, the cold sweat sliding down your forehead, mingling with the sharp aroma of distant smoldering wood. With every breath, a quiet dread pulsed. Failing here wasn't just warning. It was a whispered sentence crawling upon your skin. You knew survival in this hidden, silent pursuit meant enduring not only the heat and thirst, but the relentless weight of resignation never leaving your side. The sun had barely risen when your bare feet met the cracked earth. Its warmth, timid yet insistent, like a slow wave rolling endlessly beneath you. Ahead, the dry landscape stretched, muted ochres fading into pale browns, a canvas tired of color, where twisted acacias fought the heat with gnarled branches. Sounds reached you in thin threads, the distant buzz of a lone cicada, the faint rustle of brittle leaves brushing one another. Your breath mingled with the faint, tannic scent of resin lingering on your skin, dull and sharp at once, anchoring you to this land and task. There was a strange irony in your thoughts, a quiet smirk trapped somewhere deep within. Here you were, chasing the ancient treasure of incense, while some folk in far-off cities worried about blinking screens, sudden messages, or fleeting fame. Their concerns seemed like echoes from another world, trivial shadows compared to your steady rhythm of search and survival. Your routine unfolded like a weathered dance. You adjusted the basket strap across your shoulder, the fibrous rope biting lightly into your skin. You stooped to examine a rugged tree trunk, tracing fingers over bark rough like old parchment. For a fleeting moment, a thin breeze stirred a cluster of leaves, casting shifting patches of light that danced softly. On your face, that hint of beauty was brief, a quiet reprieve, before the hum of insects and the sun's growing weight pulled you back into the ritual. Suddenly, an odd stillness fell over the village behind you. The morning chorus of birds abruptly ceased, replaced by an eerie hush. From the corner of your eye, you caught a distant figure freeze, a gaze cast long and tense across the dusty horizon. Even the juniper's crackle at the fire's edge stilled, as if the heat itself held its breath. The familiar sounds, The small comforts of routine vanished in an instant, leaving only silence to stretch wide and thin before you. Ei, antes que Morfeu te pegue de vez, dá uma conferida rápida se você continua inscrito. Para alguns, o botão sumiu e eu não quero que você perca as próximas histórias. Para dormir. Aproveita e deixa um like macio como um travesseiro. Me conta nos comentários de onde você nos ouve e que horas são aí. Sua interação mantém este cantinho de calma vivo. Valeu por fazer parte. You stood frozen for a moment, the sudden hush stretching like thick silk around you, pressing against your skin. The village behind you, once a gentle clatter of life, had slipped into a breathless pause. The cicadas ceased their chorus, the distant crow fell silent, and even the light shifted, as if reluctant to ripple through the still air. Your chest rose and fell slowly, each exhale a delicate thread unraveling in the heavy quiet. You felt the slight scrape of dry leaves beneath your sandals, brittle and crackling, as though the earth itself conspired to hold its breath. The figure at the edge of your vision remained rigid, hardly moving, an elongated shadow standing sentinel under a thin, pale sky. You strained your senses, touching the air for whispers. Nothing but the faintest tremor of a breeze, dragging dry dust across the cracked dirt like a shy secret. Your hand instinctively tightened around the woven basket's strap, the rough fibers rasping softly against your skin, grounding you. You pushed forward, each slow step deliberate, pressing the hardened earth beneath your bare feet. The ochre hills merged with the horizon, unfolding endlessly, their ancient silence seeming to swell with untold stories. Around you, twisted acacias bent in slow, stubborn arcs, their gnarled fingers tracing invisible patterns against the brittle blue blank above. The brittle leaves whispered faintly in the stillness, fragile sighs that seemed frozen in time. Your eyes wandered, picking out the details that mattered, anchoring you deeper in the moment. The bark beneath your fingertips was cracked and rough, a textured story of seasons weathered and burned by the unyielding sun. The scent of resin lingered, faint but stubborn, mingling with the dry dust and the slow, earthy aroma of cracked clay. The heat pressed steadily against your skin, relentless yet familiar, a steady weight pressing your shoulders downward, bending your back with quiet insistence. Despite the stillness, your senses remained alert, each breath a cautious thread in the tapestry of silence. Every subtle sound seemed amplified, the faint twitch of a leaf, the soft shuffle of insect legs brushing against twigs, the distant rumble of a solitary beetle trudging through dust. The monotony wrapped its fingers around your thoughts, tugging them slowly into a steady, trance-like rhythm. You found a strange comfort in the sameness, the endless repetition of steps, breaths, and the slow, measured beat of your heartbeat against the vast, quiet. Your hand repeated the gentle motion of brushing aside a cluster of brittle leaves, the dry crackle sharp but oddly soothing. The basket at your side shifted in its weight, the rope biting a little deeper into your shoulder from the strain of carrying the unknown. Each movement unfolded in languid detail, a deliberate dance between caution and necessity. You paused at a low branch, the tender shoots of resin barely visible beneath a coat of dust. Your fingers caressed the sticky surface, the subtle tackiness, almost like memory, caught between your skin and the silence of the forest. Yet, beneath the surface of the dread had not dissipated. It hid in the spaces between sounds, in the dry air that clung to your lungs tight and brittle. Every unbroken moment of silence was a breath held too long. You could feel it, faint and persistent, a pressure that pressed just behind your eyes, a whisper that told you the stakes of failure were impossibly high. Your gaze drifted back to the village, now shrouded in stillness, the faint outlines of roofs and walls blurring in the shimmering heat. The familiar sounds that had once offered ease were gone, replaced by a void where your attention was pulled tight like a thread stretched over a void you dared not look into. The scent of smoke, subtle and distant, carried on the air like a breath held between life and unknown dangers. A soft, almost imperceptible rustle pulled you again into the moment. You lowered your eyes, watching a small lizard skitter across the cracked earth, its scales catching the sunlight in muted bursts. The tiny creature moved with a purposeful quietness, a reminder of life that persisted despite everything. The moment felt fragile and precious, a speck of calm balanced on the edge of something far deeper and more uncertain. Continuing your path, each step was precise, measured, as if the very ground underfoot could shift and betray you if you faltered. The sun climbed higher, the heat growing heavier, pressing a slow sweat into your skin. Your breath lengthened and warmed, mingling with the dry fragrance of juniper smoke lingering faintly along the path. Time seemed to thicken, every second stretched thin like a stretched rope about to fray. You reached a shallow dip in the earth where twisted roots nodded through cracked soil. You bent forward slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile stillness, your hands moving with deliberate reverence. The scent here was stronger, resin thick and pungent, almost sticky with promise. You traced your fingers along a narrow groove in the bark, feeling the sticky sap pulse faintly beneath the dry surface. The tiny particles clung stubbornly to your skin as you gathered your find with practiced care, the slow scrape of resin settling softly into your basket's rough weave. The moment held a fragile peace, a brief pulse of purpose felt in the precise ritual of collection. Yet beneath this fragile calm, the silent weight of waiting waited patiently. You stood again, shoulders aching slightly from the burden, eyes flickering toward the distant village, where shadows now stretched longer, and the silence had deepened further. The heat had shifted, the day inching toward its most unforgiving chapter. A distant murmur broke through the stillness, the faintest sound of hurried footsteps carried lightly on the wind. Your breath caught, the pulse quickening softly as you turned your gaze sharply toward the horizon. There, emerging like an impossibly slow ripple in the landscape, a faint movement began to take shape. A figure shaded in dust and heat, distant but moving with patient inevitability, advancing step by step through the haze. The world itself seemed to hold its breath again, the quiet, tense and unyielding, as you prepared, breath steadying, to face what was coming, slowly, steadily, unescaped. You held your breath as the figure approached, its slow, patient steps stirring fine clouds of dust that caught the harsh sunlight. In fragile halos, each footfall was measured, deliberate, as if the very earth beneath hesitated to accept the weight. Your senses sharpened. Every dry whisper of wind, every faint shift in the air's texture became a thread you wove into a careful map of this moment. The silhouette resolved steadily from a haze, contouring against the ochre hills behind it. A cloak, tattered and thin, fluttered faintly in the breeze, revealing glimpses of worn leather straps and the faint glimmer of well-used tools hanging at the waist. The figure carried no haste, no urgency. Instead, there was a slow, unyielding certainty radiating in each measured movement. You felt the heat intensify, a pressure that bent your shoulders, cupped your skin in slow waves of warmth, yet your body stayed rigid, rooted in silent watchfulness. You shifted your weight, the course, sand yielding softly beneath your foot as you remained still, every muscle taut, the basket at your side pressed with insistent weight against your ribs, a constant reminder of the day's labor and the fragile treasure it held. The scent of resin still clung stubbornly to your fingers, mingling with the earthy tang of sweat and the faint smoke drifting from distant fires. Time seemed to slow further, stretched taut like a bowstring pulled to its limit. A small, sudden bird call split the silence, sharp yet tentative, a lone sparrow's hesitant note from the far edge of the hills. The sound fractured the thick quiet like a drop of water falling into still glass. For a moment, the world shifted beneath your feet. The figure staggered slightly, as if taking notice, before settling back into its steady pace. You gaze locked on the slow advance, heart matching the rhythm. Pulse, pause, pause. You imagine the coarse texture of the ground up ahead, the way the pebbles might crunch underfoot if the stranger disturbed them. A wave of dry heat rolled off the earth, curling faintly like invisible smoke, carrying with it whispers of arid stone and sun-baked clay. Your fingers flexed against the basket's strap, tracing its coarse fibers in repetitive, grounding circles, each rotation a fragile anchor against the swelling tension. The figure's face remained shadowed beneath a worn hood, features obscured but not unkind. Despite the slow march of approaching inevitability, the air held a strange stillness, as though the land itself waited, breath bated, for what might follow. Your own breath deepened, slow and measured, tracing a thread of life through the dense quiet. Every so often, a flake of dry leaf drifted to the ground, its brittle rustle barely audible, a fragile echo of change in an unchanging day. The acacia branches above your head twisted against the pale sky, their spindly shadows reaching like gnarled fingers, casting a delicate latticework of shade over your exposed skin. The sun balanced high, an unmerciful orb, its rays sifting slowly through the sparse canopy, touching you with a gentle but unyielding warmth. You took a deliberate step forward, the earth firm and unyielding beneath. Then another, each sound swallowed by the heavy air. The slow cadence became a ritual, a measured dance with all senses venturing into that moment of fragile connection. You noticed the subtle twitch of a distant lizard's tail, the faint crinkle of dried twigs, the memory of resin pulsing faintly through your fingertips. Your thoughts lingered momentarily on the quiet village behind you, now shrouded in shadow and silence, its fragile peace suspended. A thread of smoke curled lazily from a distant rooftop, intertwining with the fading cadence of cicadas that had once filled the morning. That serene stillness felt precious, an ember of normalcy, nestled among the relentless demands of survival. Yet here, in this expanding emptiness, you felt the weight of unspoken expectancy. The unknown stretched out before you, wide and brittle like the cracked earth beneath your feet. Your heartbeat slowed, synchronized with the subtle cadence of the wind brushing dry leaves along the cracked path. The figure stopped just beyond a sparse cluster of acacias, the faint snap of a twig breaking your stillness. You exhaled slowly, the warm breath trembling as it blended with the dusty air, fingers loosening their grip on the basket strap. You allowed a brief tremor to ripple through your frame, a silent admission of the moment's gravity. The amber light shifted, throwing long, flickering shadows that stretched and folded around you like slow waves. Somewhere nearby, a distant juniper crackled faintly, the whisper of forgotten flames carried faintly on the heat-warped air. The scent of smoke wavered, delicate but insistent, weaving a tapestry of sound and scent that cocooned you in a fragile web. Still, the face beneath the hood remained hidden, the figure a silhouette forged in dust and sunlight, patient and unwavering. You felt the steady pull of inevitability, like the slow tick of an unseen clock, marking the passage of fragile moments into an uncertain future. Your gaze lifted to the horizon, where the parched hills folded into one another, under a sky beginning to soften at its edges. The quiet around you thickened once more, anticipation pooling in the spaces between breath and sound. Then, as the heat pressed slow and absolute against your skin, you caught a sudden movement from the figure, a slow, deliberate lift of an arm, revealing a small, worn object glinting faintly as it caught a stray sunbeam. Your breath caught, the pulse quickening softly, like a whisper of something yet to come, a step in the quiet dance between waiting and action, between the known and the shadowed unknown that stretched just beyond the edge of sight. The figure's slow movement drew nearer, each step stirring the dry air, raising tiny clouds that shimmered faintly in the relentless sun. Your gaze never wavered, fixed on that advancing silhouette, outlined against the muted ochre hills, a stillness within motion, each detail etched sharply in the quiet heat. The rough weave of your basket bit again into your shoulder, a constant reminder of the fragile cargo resting inside. A prize born from arduous patience. As the distance dissolved, you noticed the way the old cloak fluttered with the hesitant breeze, worn fabric whispering secrets of journeys past. The leather straps clinked softly with the shifting weight of tools, the scent of weathered leather mixing faintly with the dry resin scent that clung stubbornly to your skin. The sun-painted shapes in amber and rust upon the figure's form, highlighting folded cloth and shadow without revealing much more. Your feet pressed carefully against the cracked earth, grounding you as your breath slowed. The air hung heavy, tasting faintly of smoke and dust, each inhale pulling in the vast silence. A distant whisper of wind teased the brittle branches overhead, their thin shadows scraping softly across your arms in languid strokes. The quiet seemed to stretch, folding around this moment, elongating seconds into a fragile thread connecting two separate existences. Without haste, the figure stopped beneath a sparse acacia, its branches twisted like arthritic hands reaching skyward. A slow rustle, delicate, deliberate, broke the silence as the stranger's hand emerged from the cloak, weathered fingers unclasping a small object. The sun caught it, a glint of dull metal worn by time and touch. You recognized it, a slender knife, its blade patinated but keen, familiar like a muted whisper of necessity. Your heartbeat shifted, but you did not falter. You remained still, rooted by a deep acknowledgement of what was unfolding. The scent of resin thickened around you, mingling with the harsher tang of sweat baked dry by the sun. A bead of moisture slid slow and deliberate down your temple, tracing a cool path amid the heat's oppressive press. The figure's presence was steady, yet silent, the slow cadence of breathing sinking faintly with your own measured inhalations. You felt the weight of shared space, the invisible thread pulled taut between anticipation and restraint. The basket's rough strap scraped again beneath your palm as you shifted slightly, careful not to betray the tension rising beneath your calm. For a moment, your eyes flicked to the distant village, now layered with stretching shadows that clung reluctantly to sun-warped roofs and dusty walls. The silence there was deeper now, more complete, like a held breath fading softly beyond. Reach. Somewhere faintly, a juniper whispered its slow, crackling song, the last note of distant fires retreating into the heat mirage. Your gaze returned to the figure as it lowered the knife slowly back into the cloak, the motion deliberate and unhurried. The fragile peace of the moment seemed to pulse, a heartbeat of possibility, hovering between revelation and concealment. The sun traced slow paths over cracked earth, warming your skin with a gentle insistence that bordered on heavy comfort. A faint breeze stirred, drawing dry leaves in lazy arcs across the ground, their brittle rustle a soft murmur beneath the vast stillness. You inhaled deeply, tasting the faint acrid blend of resin, dust, and distant smoke, allowing it to root you where you stood, caught between past certainties and unknown futures. Carefully, you stepped forward, the earth firm beneath. Your unshod feet, each movement, slowed into deliberate ritual. The basket's weight shifted with you, an unspoken burden, tethered to hope and necessity. You glanced up, meeting the figure's shadowed gaze briefly, a meeting held in silence, where no words were needed to speak volumes. A thin shaft of sunlight pierced the canopy, warming the curve of your neck, and calling attention to the slow droop of your eyelids under heat and fatigue. Despite the heavy air pressing down, a delicate thread of calm wove through you, a quiet resilience held in the rhythm of breath and the measured pace of this shared moment. Beyond the figure, the hills rolled quietly into distance, their faded colors softening against a sky that began to pale with the noon's slow waning. The vast openness pressed inward now, a subtle pressure that carried both promise and unspoken caution. Your senses sharpened at once, tuned to the faintest shifts, a twitch of a leaf, the distant scrape of stone against stone. Suddenly, a sliver of motion caught the corner of your eye, the faint, deliberate seed of something new stirring beneath the brittle surface. You barely noticed as the figure's hand lifted again, slower this time, reaching deeper into the cloak's folds. Fingers emerged, holding something smaller, a tiny vial, dark glass, catching the sun and swallowing the light. Time stretched as you both remained still, the vial's presence an unvoiced message hanging between you like a fragile thread. Your skin prickled beneath the sun's gaze, the heat mingling with a growing surge of anticipation weaving through the quiet. The scent of resin grew heavier, sticky and sweet in the heat-warped air. Your breath, shallow, You allowed your gaze to trace the contours of the stranger's concealed face beneath the cloak's hood, seeing only faint shadows and dust. The world around you seemed to pause. The rustle of leaves, the distant hum of insects, the slow crackle of juniper, frozen into a fragile tableau suspended in time. The figure shifted slightly, tilting the vial toward you, its contents glimmering with a muted, almost otherworldly hue. The slow unfolding of this gesture carried weight beyond words, a secret shared silently beneath the merciless sun. Your heart thrummed with a hesitant hope, tethered tightly to the tension thickening around you. The silence deepened before breaking, just as a soft, distant sound, a single, tentative step, echoed across the cracked earth, falling somewhere beyond the boundaries of your shared stillness, promising that this quiet chapter was only just beginning. The figure's slow steps softened their approach, each footfall stirring a modest wisp of dust that trembled in the unyielding sunlight. Your gaze remained fixed, unwavering, tracing the silhouette as it emerged steadily from the shimmering heat haze. The basket's weight at your side pressed deeply into your ribs, its coarse strap a constant tether to the day's labor and everything held within. A faint breeze teased the cracked leaves overhead, their dry rustle like a whisper in the vast stillness. The acacia branches stretched thin shadows against the pale sky, their spindly fingers tracing irregular patterns on your exposed skin. The sun hung high, steady and unrelenting, casting slow lancing rays that warmed you with a gentle insistence that hovered between comfort and exhaustion. As the stranger paused beneath a leafless branch, you saw the faint shift of movement, weathered. Fingers unclasping a small worn object from beneath the cloak's folds. The dull gleam of metal caught the fading sun. A slender knife, its blade etched softly from age, but still keen with purpose. The air thickened, the resin scent mingling now with the harsher tang of sweat drying on parched skin. You felt your pulse step up, steady yet cautious, every breath slow and measured. Your hand tightened around the basket's strap, the rough fibers rasping a grounding rhythm against your palm. Your gaze flickered to the distant village, that patchwork of shadows and heat shimmering against cracked rooftops, where silence now grew deeper, more complete, a breath held just beyond reach. The stranger lowered the knife with deliberate calm, sliding it back beneath the layers of time-worn fabric. The moment seemed suspended. A fragile stillness trembled between revelation and concealment. Dry dust swirled lazily at your feet, settling softly, as if to mark the quiet that pressed heavy into your lungs. A gentle stir of air carried sweet resin and smoke, weaving a tapestry of scent that cocooned you both in a fragile web of shared space. The branches above quivered slightly, casting fleeting patterns of shadow and light, like delicate smoke rising then dissipating, ephemeral as the future you both awaited. You shifted forward, cautiously, each step laid down with precision, the earth firm but fragile beneath your bare soles. The basket shifted, its contents settling deeper against your side. The sun's heat pooled in slow waves, pressing constantly, wrapping around your neck and shoulders like a fold of warm, heavy cloth. Your eyes met the silent exchange, filled with the weight of unspoken things. There were no words, only the subtle tightening of muscles, the nearly imperceptible nod that spoke volumes in absence of sound. The world seemed to fold inward here, the endless hills growing quiet under a sky that softened at the edges, sliding toward the hush of midday. The landscape pressed close, a muted tableau of ochre dust and bleached bone color, where the distant hills melded like tired sketches fading at the edges of memory. The sparse canopy above filtered light like drifting embers, the brittle branches conducting a slow and deliberate symphony of falling leaves and whispering wind. Your senses bristled at the tiniest shifts, the faint scrape of a stone rolling slowly downhill, the dry snap of a twig under unseen weight, the subtle scent change as smoke trailed faintly from a distant fire. A delicate thread of anticipation wound tighter in your chest, tethering breath to heartbeat like a fragile pulse barely held together. The figure reached again into the cloak's depths, this time producing something smaller, a tiny vial, its dark glass swallowing the sun, engulfing light in deep, muted waves. You watched the slow arc of their hand as the vial tilted gently towards you, catching a stray beam in a watery shimmer that seemed almost unnatural under the steady heat. Your breath caught, the pulse quickening in soft but unmistakable thuds, a cautious hope threading through the thickening tension. The resin scent deepened, now sticky and sweet, clinging stubbornly to the air and your skin. You felt the slow bead of sweat, tracing a deliberate path down your neck, the warmth mingling with the cool promise of the vial's silent secret. Around you, leaves fluttered lazily, falling like tiny shadows onto cracked earth, their brittle rustle a counterpoint to the deep quiet. The branches seemed to hold their breath, the sun painting long, slow shadows across your arms, the heat bathing your face in a glow that was both gentle and unyielding. You extended your hand slowly, deliberately, fingers trembling just enough to feel the weight of the moment. The figure's grip tightened briefly, transferring the vial with a silent gravity that tethered your fingers to a thread stretched taut between past and future, between unknown dangers and a fragile chance. The village lay quietly behind you, its silence now a deep and suffocating hush that wrapped around the hills like a shadow. You sensed the fragile calm of the moment fracturing, a slow rumble just beyond the horizon, a soft, almost imperceptible tremor in the earth that spoke of things shifting beneath the surface. Your gaze lifted to the distant hills, where heat rippled in slow waves that distorted the world's edges, where nothing seemed certain but the relentless sun. The vial held tightly in your palm seemed to hum softly with a promise unwritten, its dark glass swallowing light and shadow, keeping secrets you were only just beginning to understand. Then, suddenly, the sharp crack of a dry branch snapped in the distance, closer than before, a sound slicing the thick silence like a shard of glass. The figure's head turned slowly, hooded gaze reaching beyond your shared space, eyes alert to a presence unseen. Your breath stalled. The sun paused in its relentless climb, and the day's fragile balance wavered, as if the wind itself hesitated, caught between surrender and the sharp edge of what was to come. The sharp crack of a dry branch echoed again, closer now, a brittle sound slicing through the still air like a whisper caught in tension. A slow shiver traced your spine as your eyes followed the figure's hooded head, turning toward the sound, the dim shadow beneath the fabric shifting slightly in the relentless sun. Your breath caught in cautious rhythm, chest rising and falling with measured steadiness, every muscle pulled taut beneath your sun-baked skin. The weight pressed deeper into your side, the basket that bore your fragile harvest, a silent anchor, steady and firm. You shifted your bare foot on the cracked ground, the rough earth, refusing to yield more than a faint crunch underfoot. The faint rustle of brittle leaves drifted, falling slowly like quiet echoes from distant branches, a fragile metronome marking the vast silence that swallowed the space between moments. Your gaze drifted toward the edge of the hills, where heat ripples blurred the horizon into wavering bands of ochre and pale gold. The sun rode high, relentless in its slow, oppressive arc, bathing the bent acacias in warm ochre light. Shadows stretched thin and long, clawing gently along the ground, their movements as gradual and certain as the passing of the day itself. A soft stirring of air brushed across your skin, a subtle caress laden with dust and the sticky scent of resin, sticky and sweet, clinging to the raw heat. The figure remained motionless, but alert beneath. The tattered cloak, a silent sentinel standing against the shifting tides of sun and earth. You felt the faint pulse of anticipation throb deep beneath your ribs, soft but insistent, tethering your breath to the glimmering heat. Your hand closed tightly around the basket's strap once more, the rough fibers rasping softly against your palm. A grounding presence that kept the rising tension from unraveling completely. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold itself, every sound sucked into the thick air. The faint scrape of pebble rolling, the muted snap of dry stick beneath unseen weight, the ghost of a distant bird call teasing the edges of quiet. You took a measured step forward. The earth pressed firmly beneath your bare soul, cool and rough where shadows lingered, warm and loose where sunlit patches cracked the surface. With dry exhaustion, your movements were slow, deliberate, a careful dance balanced between caution and necessity. The basket shifted slightly, weight pressing into your side like the slow ache of daylight itself. Your eyes lingered on the figure, shadowed face turned just enough to catch the sunlight on a gaunt cheekbone. The cloak's torn hem fluttered faintly in a hesitant breeze, threads catching stray shafts of gold. You sensed the slow approach of something profound yet unspoken. The fragile promise hung soft between you, a moment suspended in the dry, still air. The scent of smoke wafted again, distant but unmistakable, faint tendrils curling up from a place beyond the hills, weaving through the resin and dust in the heavy warmth. You inhaled deeply, tasting the acrid edge of burned wood wrapped in the steady sweetness of pine sap and earth baked dry by the sun. Your heart beat slow and steady, the rhythm a quiet pulsing beneath the blistering calm. You sensed the fragile tension soften, splinter just enough to reveal a slender thread of something else, something neither fear nor certainty, but a waiting, held in the hush between sun and shade. The figure shifted, revealing a slender hand clutching a small, worn vial, its dark glass swallowing light into itself like a shadow nodded softly beneath the relentless glare. You watched as the hand rose slowly, the glass flickering in the faint, shivering shimmer of the midday air. A slow breath escaped your lips, mingling with the warm draft carrying dust and resin. Fingers trembling just slightly, you extended your own, reaching toward the fragile vessel, the contact deliberate and slow. The rough, weathered grip of the stranger met yours, a silent pact forged between cautious hope and the stark truth pressing through the heat-worn silence. The glass was cool, oddly so beneath the oppressive warmth, a sliver of shadow carried in your palm. For a moment, the world contracted to the pulse of your joined hands and the faint hum of warmth in the heavy air. The distant village breathed quietly behind you, its silence wrapped tight in the heat's embrace. Somewhere far off, a faint murmur stirred, the far-off shuffle of footsteps, too soft, too measured for comfort. Your pulse quickened, yet your body held still, drawn taut, like a thread woven between sun-baked earth and the unforgiving sky. The hills shimmered ahead, their ancient arcs blurring gently with the haze of midday heat. Fragile vial seemed to glow dimly, a muted herald of what was to come, swallowing all light and dark within its glassy depths. Suddenly, the sharp snap of a twig rang nearer, a jagged crack in the stillness that rippled through the dusty air. The figure's head tilted slowly toward the sound, silent eyes narrowing beneath the hood. Your breath caught, the day's fragile balance, poised on the edge of something unseen, yet stirring beneath the unyielding sun. The moments stretched long and thin, an unspoken question hanging heavy between shadows and light. a breath held just past the limits of endurance, waiting for the next movement in a world that seemed to stand still beneath the burning sky. You felt the dry weight of the earth beneath your bare feet as your gaze remained locked on the slow figure standing just beyond the sparse acacias. The heat clung to your skin like a second layer, suffocating in its steadiness, folding your shoulders inward as if the sun itself pressed upon your frame. Around you the world seemed breathless, every sound softened into a faint memory. The crunch of gravel underfoot, the distinct hum of a lone insect struggling against the stillness. The vial rested heavy and cool in your palm, a pocket of shadow, swallowed within its dark glass. Its presence felt ancient and fragile at once, a secret holding its breath alongside you beneath this unyielding sky. The resin scent thickened, blooming sticky and sweet in the air, weaving with the harsher trace of sun-baked earth and faint smoke drifting lazily from the village, now swallowed by silence. Your fingers flexed slightly. The rough strap of the basket, a familiar anchor, biting gently into your shoulder. The heat traced slow streams of sweat down your spine, coiling with the persistent tension that laced your breath. Behind you, the shadows stretched long and thin, casting the village's outlines into blurred silhouettes that trembled with the distant ripple of heat waves. The figures' movements were minimal, deliberate, each shift and gesture slow as if in reverence to the thick quiet surrounding you both. The knife disappeared beneath the folds of ragged cloth. The hands settled once again beneath the cloak's worn hem, holding the promise that had been passed in silence. Your eyes lingered on the hooded face, partly veiled beneath shadows, features blurred by dust and distance, an inscrutable presence anchored in patient stillness. A sparrow's song floated briefly through the air, fragile and tentative, fracturing the silence like a drop of water skimming across a sun-bleached stone. You inhaled deeply, the dry sweetness of resin mixing with the sharp pinch of smoke and sun-warmed dust pressed against your throat. Your heartbeat slowed, drumbeats syncing softly with the slow pulse of the horizon's shimmering heat. Slowly you stepped forward, your bare feet sinking briefly into the cracked earth. Imprints traced fragile and fleeting beneath the steady weight of the sky. The basket swayed lightly at your side, its contents shifting with a quiet friction. Every movement carried the meticulous care of necessity, a sacred ritual performed under the watchful gaze of the endless, dusty hills. Your breath extended, warming as it left your lungs, mingling with the soft rustle of brittle leaves stirred by an almost imperceptible breeze. The acacia branches above whispered faint blessings, their spindly shadows flickering like delicate lace across your sun-soil-worn skin. The day pressed above, a slow arc of light and heat stretching toward its zenith. And yet the moment held you, frozen in a thread of time so thin, it nearly vanished between the pulse of breaths. You looked toward the village again, its silence heavier now, settling over the cracked rooftops and empty streets like a cloak folded tight against the night. The faint curl of smoke rose, curling skyward in restless spirals, whispered away by the dry wind. It was a distant fire, a whispered warning on the horizon's edge, stirring something deep in your bones, a swift, silent tremor beneath the sun's relentless gaze. Your eyes returned to the figure, who shifted ever so slightly, the cloak's tattered hem brushing the coarse grass. For an instant, their eyes met yours, a glance like the slow unfurling of a secret. Something soft and unspoken passed silently between you, carried on the thin currents of heat and hesitation. You saw in that shadowed gaze a flicker of urgency wrapped carefully in measured calm, a patient will tightening with the promise of fragile hope. A crack snapped sharply nearby, the dry branch surrendering to wait, slicing the silence with sudden clarity. Both you and the stranger froze, muscles taut beneath sweating skin, breaths caught halfway, as if torn between moving and remaining still. The air seemed to shudder for a moment, vibrating with a silent warning that rippled across the cracked earth like the first tremor before a storm. Your pulse quickened, each heartbeat flooding your veins with icy fire even beneath the sun's hot insistence. You felt the basket's rough strap graze your ribs with renewed urgency, a tether to what you carried and the delicate balance it represented. The village behind you held its breath, the distant hills glowing dully under the heat's oppressive weight. The stranger's hand rose once more from beneath the cloak, fingers stretching slowly toward the horizon. The small vial caught the sun's light, glimmering faintly, as if calling shadows forth to meet it. Your gaze followed the motion, breath shallow and steady, drawn taut with the silent tension building between what was revealed and what still lingered unseen. Then the earth trembled beneath your feet, barely at first, a delicate vibration, fragile as a whispered secret, passing through the crust of this relentless land. The hills seemed to pulse with a quiet hunger, their ochre faces softening and then sharpening in the wavering heat. The world held still and then shifted subtly, the fragile piece fracturing like cracked glass poised on the edge of falling. Your heart thundered in quiet defiance as the stranger's eyes darted beyond you, where shadows pooled thick and unyielding beneath the relentless noon sun. The silent exchange broke. Time bent and wavered, sending the first thread of an unspoken truth stretching outward beyond your sight into a future trembling on the edge of silence and sound. You knew now this was only the beginning. The earth beneath your feet held steady, its cracked surface cool where shadowed and warm in sunlit patches. You stayed still a moment longer, feeling the weight of the dark vial nestled carefully in your palm. A small fragment of a secret recently uncovered. The air around you continued to thrum softly with an unspoken promise, thick with resin and dust, the faint echo of distant smoke curling gently as if it might linger forever in the hot breeze. Your eyes remained fixed on the silent figure beside you. Their breath, slow and even, seemed to match the rhythm of the land. A pulse measured and calm beneath the blistering sun. The worn cloak shifted lightly, the faintest whisper of fabric against skin, and the promise, wrapped in shadowed folds, held steady in the tension poised between you. Inhaling deeply, you savored the mix of earthy scents, the bitter tang of smoke, the sticky sweetness of pine resin, the dry grit of dust clinging to your skin like a second skin, hardened by the relentless heat. The world felt both vast and intimate, held captive in the delicate balance of this silent exchange beneath a sky stretched wide and pale. A subtle murmur rose behind you, the faint shuffle of footsteps blending into the stillness, hurrying yet hesitant. You didn't look back, but felt the pressing weight of that sound settle like a stone in your chest. The village breathed quietly, shadows stretching longer, its hush deepening as the heart of the day edged ever closer. Your grip tightened once more on the coarse basket strap, the fibers rasping against your palm in a soothing rhythm. The harvest within pressed faintly, fragile and precious, a tether to the land and to survival. Every breath you took was a deliberate act, slow, heavy, anchored in the here and now. A soft breeze stirred the acacia branches overhead, their brittle leaves trembling like ancient scrolls fluttering in a slow, secret wind. Light lanced through the sparse canopy in thin shafts that fell across your arms and face, warming your skin, but offering relief like a whispered caress. The dry earth smelled faintly of aged clay and forgotten rain, memories caught between cracks long baked by the fierce sun. You shifted, muscles taut but fluid, stepping carefully so as not to disturb the fragile tableau surrounding you. Each footfall pressed slowly into the earth, the dry gravel crunching faintly beneath your bare soles. The figure beside you mirrored your measured pace, their movements deliberate, patient, an unspoken dance of shared resolve and quiet understanding. Your eyes drifted toward the horizon, where golden hills rolled outward, softened by the midday haze. The sky hung heavy and unmoving, a pale dome stretching far beyond what you can see. A faint wisp of smoke spiraled lazily from the direction of the village, threading untold stories through the warm air. The silence stretched thin, taut as a tightly strung bow. Every sound became magnified. The faint slap of cloth against leathery skin, the subtle scrape of a stone nudged gently by a shifting wind, the distant, muffled rustle of leaves stirred by the smallest of draughts. The vial's weight pulsed lightly in your hand, almost alive with promise and the unknown. The figure tilted it slowly, catching light in dark curves, revealing a slow gleam that hinted at untold depths. The cool glass pressed against your palm was a ripple of contrast against the unrelenting heat. Then the quiet fractured sharply. A sudden crack, crisp and brittle, shattered the fragile hush, like a fragile branch broken beneath an unseen weight. Your heart jerked in. Startled rhythm, the figure's head lifted slowly, eyes narrowing beneath the shadowed hood. Your breath thinned. The pressing heat seemed to pause, the earth frozen in a moment straddling tension and stillness. Time stretched, as fragile as a spider's thread pulled taut against the vast expanse of sky. The figure's hand lowered the vial, careful and slow, as though it carried the weight of the world within. There was no haste. The moment was sacred, holding itself with deliberate restraint. Shadows deepened as the sun shifted slightly, long lines folding across your weathered skin and the cracked earth. Somewhere distant, the faint murmur of life stirred again, echoed in the gentle rustling of dry branches, caught in a transient breath of wind. You stepped forward again, slow and deliberate, each motion a measured letter in a silent conversation with the land. The basket bumped softly at your side, a reminder of the fragile cargo carried without words, without haste. A breath of cool air touched your face, carrying with it the acrid edge of smoke and the sweet, stubborn scent of resin that clung desperately in the unyielding heat. The figure beside you moved in tandem, their eyes unreadable beneath shadows, reflecting an unspoken determination. Your gaze swept the hills once more, their undulating slopes softened by the heat haze, colors blurring like faded memories. The sky above seemed to fold gently, a vast and steadfast dome sheltering this quiet, charged moment. Suddenly a sharp glint caught at the corner of your vision, metal flashing briefly beneath the figure's sleeve. Their hand slipped out slowly, revealing not the knife, but a slender coil of finely woven thread, pale and shimmering faintly like a strand of captured light. Your pulse stilled in recognition. This simple, delicate object held a new weight, tighter and more intricate than what had come before. A small key to a door yet unopened, a silent herald of paths yet untraveled. The quiet that followed was thick with anticipation and a fragile hope that whispered through the dry air like the last fragile breeze before a storm. The sun dipped slightly, casting long, slow shadows that twined around you both like silent witnesses. The village behind remained still, its solemn shapes softened in the lengthening light, waiting as the world held its breath for what was to unfold next. You felt the earth settle beneath your feet, steady and enduring, as the figure beside you shifted ever so slightly, the pale thread of light glimmering faintly in their hand, almost pulsing with quiet purpose. The air held its breath, heavy with resin's stubborn sweetness and the dry echo of distant smoke. And you finally allowed yourself to exhale, slow and measured, letting the tension ripple softly from clenched muscles into the wide ochre expanse. Together, you stepped forward, the basket's familiar weight a tether to the labor behind you, to the land that held its secrets both harsh and sacred. Each footfall whispered a closing rhythm, a farewell to the ritual that had burdened your days and nights with its silent insistence. The sun, climbing to its zenith, no longer pressed like a relentless interrogator, but warmed gently, as if recognizing the end of the long, patient quest. Your gaze met the figure's shadowed face again, and in the quiet exchange there was the unspoken acknowledgement of survival, not just of body, but of spirit. The small vial nestled lightly in your palm, cool against the sun-baked heat of your skin, held more than resin. It carried the fragile promise of renewal, a chance to soften the unforgiving world you both inhabited. Behind you, the village remained wrapped in its hush, but now the silence was less oppressive. The faintest skein of life began to stir among shuttered windows and cracked rooftops. Somewhere distant, the rustle of dry leaves mingled with a cautious bird call, a timid herald of morning's return. You turned your steps homeward, each one a slow, deliberate imprint, a tracing of finality on the cracked canvas of earth. The twisted acacias, gnarled and ancient, seemed less like adversaries and more like companions bearing witness to your journeys. Close, their brittle leaves shimmered drowsily, stretched thin beneath the softer light that now spilled languid and kind over the hills. As you passed through the edges of the village, the familiar scents, the earthy clays warmed by the sun, the lingering trail of resin blending with faint smoke, welcomed you back like a whisper of forgotten comfort. The cracked walls held the stories of countless days endured, and now, with the vial's weight still nestled in your grasp, there was a sense that stories yet unborn would rise from this quiet dawn. You reached your shelter, its stone cool beneath your palms, despite the day's heat. The faint residue of resin in the cracks, still clinging like a whispered memory. Setting the basket down gently, you traced your fingers over familiar rough surfaces, breathing in deep the quiet pulse of finality that filled the space. The figure, no longer a stranger, but a silent guardian of the path you'd walked, lingered beside the threshold. Their presence, steady and calming as a soft dusk. For a moment, words felt unnecessary. The shared understanding filled the space between you more fully than any voice could. Outside, the sun began its slow descent beyond the hills, casting long, honeyed shadows that drifted like gentle waves across the softened earth. The heat waned, replaced by a cool breath that teased dry leaves into a lazy dance with the fading light. The village, too, seemed to exhale, its stillness melting into a peaceful cadence that hummed low and steady, an ancient lullaby cradling the close of day. You sat quietly beside the fire's faint ember, the day's trials settling into the calm certainty of things accomplished. Your skin still carried the scent of resin, a fragrant echo anchoring the journey's end, mingling with the murmuring twitch of a small lizard skittering silently nearby, a final spark of life thriving in the quiet. The vial rested beside you now, a cool shadow whispering softly of healing, of hope folded delicately into each small drop it held. You thought of the dance of dusk and dawn, the endless cycle of seeking and finding, of burden and release. The heavy silence that greeted your waking hours had softened into a velvet quiet, wrapping around you like a well-worn cloak after a day spent wandering barren hills. Your eyelids grew heavy, the slow pull of rest weaving through your breath, the steady rhythm of the earth beneath, and the tender hush of night approaching. The horizon blushed gently with the promise of stars, one by one emerging in the cooling sky, nodding quietly like watchful sentinels to worlds asleep and waking. And as your body sank deeper into stillness, the quiet imprint of survival, of endurance, of fragile grace settled warmly around your heart. The basket, emptied now, but once a vessel of toil, lay close, a soft reminder that every journey finds its close, every weight eventually lifts, and every silent promise holds its dawn. You closed your eyes to the slow unfolding night, cradled by resin-scented air and the gentle, steady pulse of the earth beneath you. There, beneath the vast, forgiving sky, the last breath of day softened into the comforting hush of peace. A quiet end, a gentle rest, the perfect companion to the journey's long and winding close.